In this video, we will be learning how to represent the remainder in 3 different ways. You may have noticed that this video is slightly longer than other videos. The reason why is because throughout the video, I show how to do each example using partial quotients and using old school. So please choose which method you use and just watch the portion of the video that is that method. So if you use partial quotients, go ahead and fast forward through old school. And if you use old school, you can fast forward through partial quotients. If you would prefer to watch the whole video and learn a little bit about a different strategy, that would be great as well. Here's an example of a problem that you may see on the MCA math test at the end of the year. The division problem is 410 divided by 6. What you'll notice about the multiple choice answers is that the answers are written in 3 different ways. Some are written as a remainder, like in choice A. Others are written as decimals, like choice B and D. And one choice is written as a fraction, choice C. We're going to come back to this problem at the end of the video once we know how to represent a remainder in the 3 different ways. The first way to represent the remainder is to leave the answer as a remainder. 756 divided by 8. I'm going to multiply. It would be nice to multiply by 100, but that would be too much, so I'm going to multiply by 90. So 90 groups of 8. 90 times 8 is 720. Subtract. 5 minus 2 is 3. Okay, how many groups of 8 go into 36? We can take 4 groups out. 4 times 8 is 32. Subtract. Okay, 8 cannot go into 4, so our final answer is, we're going to add our partial quotients, 94, remainder 4. And again, we're representing the remainder as a remainder, so that's just your R and your remainder, 94 remainder 4. If we do this old school, how many times does 8 go into 75? 9 times. 9 times 8 is 72. Subtract, bring down, 8 goes into 36, 4 times, 8 times 4 is 32, subtract, and 8 cannot go into 4, so our final answer is 94, remainder 4. So this is the typical way that you are used to representing the remainder. This is the way that you've been taught since you began doing division. Now we're going to move into 2 other ways that you could represent the remainder, as a fraction and as a decimal. Okay, representing the remainder as a fraction. There are 2 pieces of information or 2 pieces that we're going to need to make that fraction. So our fraction is made up of a numerator and a denominator. In order to represent the remainder as a fraction, our numerator is going to become our remainder, and our denominator is going to be our divisor. And the divisor is that number that we divide by, the number on the outside of the division problem. So let's try this. We'll start with partial quotients. 837 divided by 5. I'm going to take out 100 groups. That's a nice even number. 100 times 5 is 500. I'm going to take out 50 groups. 50 times 5 is 250. I'm going to take out 10 groups. 10 times 5 is 50. I'm going to take out 7 groups. 7 times 5 is 35. And we're left with 2. Let's add our partial quotients. Okay, so we've got down to our whole number answer and our remainder. So to write this as a fraction, it's going to be our whole number answer, 167. The remainder becomes our numerator, so I'm going to grab that remainder, that's our new numerator. And our denominator is the divisor, or that number that we divide by. So the answer is 167 and 2/5. Let's try old school if you prefer that method. 5 goes into 8 one time. Subtract. Bring down. 5 goes into 33 6 times. 6 times 5 is 30. Subtract. Bring down. 5 goes into 37 7 times. 7 times 5 is 35. Subtract. And we have nothing left to bring down, and 5 does not go into 2. So again, we're going to write that whole number of 167. Our remainder is our numerator, and our divisor is our denominator, 167 and 2/5. Let's move on to representing the remainder as a decimal. And all you really need to know to do this is you need to know how to go from a fraction, 2/5, to a decimal. So let's start with 569 divided by 4. I'm going to take out 100. It's a nice easy number. 100 times 4 is 400. Subtract. Okay, let's go with 30 groups of 4. 30 groups of 4 is 120. Let's go with 10 groups. 10 times 4 is 40. And 2 4s go into 9 with a remainder of 1. Let's add our partial quotients. Alright, so we've got 142 with a remainder of 1. So as a fraction, this would be 142, and if we look at our remainder, that's our numerator, and our divisor is our denominator. So 142 and 1/4. What is 1/4 as a decimal? 1/4 is super easy to turn into a decimal if we think about quarters and a dollar. So 1/4 is 25 cents. So this is an easier problem to write as a decimal. We don't really need to change anything or divide anything. So this would be 142.25 because 1/4 as a decimal is 0.25. So that's our final answer. This gets a little bit easier if you are using the old school method, so let's look at that method. We have 569 divided by 4. 4 goes into 5 one time. 1 times 4 is 4. Subtract. Bring down. 4 goes into 16 4 times. 4 times 4 is 16. Subtract. Bring down. 4 goes into 9 2 times. 2 times 4 is 8. Subtract. We have nothing left to bring down. However, we want to write this as a decimal. So in old school, you can place that decimal after your whole number, and we can add zeros onto our remainders. So I'm going to add a 0 on to my 1, and I say how many times does 4 go into 10? 4 goes into 10 2 times. 2 times 4 is 8. Subtract. We still got a remainder, so we haven't finished off our decimal. So again, I'm going to add a 0 to my remainder. 4 goes into 20 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. And finally, when I subtract, I'm left with that 0. I don't have a remainder anymore. So my final answer is 142.25. Now that we know all the ways to represent a remainder, as a fraction, and as a decimal, let's go back to that multiple choice MCA example and try to solve this problem. So we're going to divide and we're going to see which one of these choices makes the most sense. So 410 divided by 6. I'm going to take 50 groups. 50 times 6 is 300. I'm going to take, let's go with, I'm having a hard time thinking of something that 6 is multiplied by to get us close to 110. So when you're having a hard time, if you can't quite think of anything, when in doubt, just go with a 10, because a 10 is a nice, easy number. So 10 times 6 would be 60. (11 minus 6 is 5. Okay, let's go with 5. 5 times 6 is 30. Okay, 6 times 3 is 18. 10 minus 8 is 2. Okay, let's add our partial quotients. 5 plus 3 is 8. 5 plus 1 is 6. So we're left with 68 remainder 2. I'm going to come over here and quick do the other strategy, and then we'll talk about possible answers. So 6 goes into 41, 5, 6 times. 6 times 6 is 36. 11 minus 6 is 5. Bring down. 6 goes into 50. 8 times. 8 times 6 is 48. Subtract. So we've got 68 remainder 2. So looking over here, we don't see 68 remainder 2. We can obviously get rid of choice A because the answer is not 68 remainder 3. We know the answer is 68 remainder 2. So what we're going to do now is we're going to change our remainder into the 2 other ways that it can be written and see if those choices are here. So let's start with how to write it as a fraction. As a fraction, we have 68 with the remainder being our numerator, and the denominator is our divisor. So 68 and 2 6. Right away we see that answer. However, this answer is not in simplest form. And we're not going to choose an answer that's not in simplest form. So we could have almost crossed this out from the beginning because 2 6 is not in simplest form. The simplest form for 2 6 would be 1/3. So if that answer said 68 and 1/3, we would be good to go, but it didn't. So we're going to cross that out. So lastly, we want to think about what would be the decimal form of 1/3. So if you take a calculator and you do 1 divided by 3 on your calculator, you're going to come out with the decimal 0.3333, and it's going to go on and on and on and on forever. So this answer as a decimal would be 68.33. We're going to stop at that hundredths place. So we see that answer in D, so I'm going to cross out B, and our final answer would be 68.33. So if you come to a problem like this on your MCA and you've gotten to the final answer and you found 68 remainder 2 and you're looking through and you don't see that, what you're going to need to do is go find how are the other ways that we could represent the remainder. Is the answer in a fraction somewhere, or is the answer as a decimal? And in this case, the answer was as a decimal.